Akshay is currently, senior marketing manager at Amazon Pay, but he's been the head of growth before this already at Dunzo, at Zomato, at 1MG. He's literally one of the people who've been the top growth professionals in India, which is why I said everyone should must attend this session. And I also share that I hope you've guys done the pre-recording because you're going to build the pre-reading because you want to sort of build on top of that and sort of help clear or flush this entire concept out in terms of helping you acquire more users. So on that note, 1, 2, 3 things: turn on your videos. Make sure, again, we have already proven that makes you more attentive as well as makes the expert feel that they're really talking to human beings. And we could just put our hands together and clap. And Akshay, welcome to Expert. Stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm just before I start, let me just figure out sharing my screen. Probably should have done this before, but
yep, we can see it.
Awesome. Great. All right. So thanks a ton, Sharad. All right. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about me. So I've spent about 6 years in growth roles at B2C tech marketplaces like Dunzo, 1MG, and Zomato. And I've spent time solving for acquisition, conversion, retention, so through the growth funnel. I was really lucky to get into this function at a time when it was very nascent. Before this, I was doing traditional media and creative planning for HUL brands in India. And very recently, last year, I joined Amazon Pay. All right, quickly moving into the agenda. You probably received this in some form, but let's still go through it. So first is, we want to spend some time understanding system design and tools, because all businesses are essentially nothing but a system, right? And it's critical to understand the system that underlies your business, because that essentially makes it possible for you to build a model and identify your points of leverage. And this is critical because you want to spend your time essentially, focusing on inputs that are going to have disproportionate outputs, right? That's how you get nonlinear exponential growth. And of course, the last part of this will be how, now that you've identified points of leverage, now that you've figured out this is your growth model, how do you essentially build a growth roadmap for it, right? And this roadmap will effectively touch all parts of your organization, right? And how do you go about hiring for it, right? So that's the structure of this session. The first part will be essentially a mix of me revisiting what I shared in the preview, and us having a discussion, taking up examples of loops that you guys have shared in your exercise, right? I think that will be a better way of really understanding the nuance of system design and loops. The second and the third part of the agenda we'll cover by looking at Dunzo's case study very specifically. We'll go through the entire process, which I believe is a very replicable process, right? And should be super helpful for you guys to adopt. Cool. Moving on.
Yeah, actually, you might just want to use the slideshow mode, so we'll just see the full screen at the top left. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Perfect.
Just visible, right?
Yeah, visible. Yeah.
Cool. So the first part is that, we've traditionally, when we've looked at growth, we've always, in fact, when we looked at marketing, even we've looked at it from the lens of funnels, right? Even the old FMCG days and even in early days of tech, we've looked at it from the lens of funnels. However, like looking at it from the lens of loops is way more effective. And it helps achieving long-term, predictable, sustainable, and compounding growth. And each of these words are very thoughtfully put here, right? So the first thing about this sentence is that I've said loops and not loop. So right, so the plural aspect is important. As you want to grow over time, you want to layer loops, and that's how you are able to grow over a period of time, right? The second is that, and that's linked to the word long term. right? The second is that it gives you predictability. Now, once you're understanding what these loops are and you then translated that into a mathematical model, you now know which parts of the inputs impact outputs, and you're able to drive predictability in terms of both the relationships of the inputs to the outputs, number one. And number two, what that also means is that every loop is finite. So it is going to plateau off. So it gives you predictability in terms of when that will end and what you need to do when that ends, because you are going to have to layer another loop or else growth will stop, right? The third thing is that inherently it has to be sustainable, right? And we'll get into this very specifically for a paid ads loop because it's one of the high capital loops of all the loops out there, right? But fundamentally, it needs to be sustainable. And by sustainability, I mean one very specific thing, which is that you can't spend more than your gross margin to drive growth, right? So if you have any variable cost, there's absolutely no way you should be spending more than your gross margin, unless you have predictability on payback and investment, etc. All of that changes things. But fundamentally, you need to know that your gross margin will allow you to grow sustainably over a period of time. On top of that, you can add investment and accelerate your growth. Sure. But without that acceleration, you still want to be sustainable, right? Especially very important in the current investment weather, right? The next thing is that you want it to be compounding, right, and not linear, right? Linear growth means that your growth tapers off in each cycle, right? So let's assume a linear scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Growth in first year is 50%, next year is 33%, and so on and so on, keeps going down. You want a growing growth system that essentially gives you scalable growth year after year, right? And why are loops so effective in helping you do that? Because loops are closed systems, right? While funnels don't allow you to understand the impact of compounding, right? Because funnels are not self-reinforcing. Loops are closed systems where inputs generate outputs, and these outputs can be directly reinvested in the input. This is a very critical part of something qualifying to be a loop, right? And this self-reinforcing mechanism creates a compounding effect over time. This is critical, right? And once we start looking at things from the lens of a loop, we also have the habit of defining everything as a loop. Everything is not a loop, right? The first example is the WhatsApp example. I think it's a fairly self-explanatory example, right? But let's get into the second example. The company is actually Stripe. Let's say Stripe gets a press mention. People read that news, get exposed to that news. A certain percentage of them, sign up and use the product. That does not lead to more press mentions. And unless and until it doesn't lead to more press mentions, it's not really a loop, right? This does not mean that press as a channel or news as a channel or PR as a channel cannot form a loop in any other example. In fact, there are examples. Something like a GoFundMe. Every time they run a charity campaign, the charity campaign gets traction. They get press mentions. As a result of those press mentions, they go get more charity campaigns, creators and contributors, and it's a loop, right? But that it's very specific to that business, right? While the pre-read covered this, I want to cover this very quickly, right? So there are two types of loop fundamentally, right? There are micro loops and there are macro loops. Micro loops are the core of your business, right? These are what fundamentally drive your growth, right? Macro loops essentially feed micro loops, right? So they make your micro loops more effective over a period of time, right? Three types of micro loops: viral, content, paid. Viral, essentially the currency is users. So the speed of the loop is a function of how many users are flowing through the system. Three types: personal, where essentially a user sees more value in the product when more users are using the product, right? So my personal utility of that product increases, and therefore I am inviting people, right? So classic examples are Facebook, WhatsApp, right? Financial viral loops are when users are inviting other users because they're getting some kind of monetary reward for it, and the other users are also joining potentially because of some kind of monetary reward, right? And this is happening because the people who are joining are generating gross margin, and that gross margin is essentially being redistributed in the form of this incentive, right? So you need a gross margin base for something like this to work, right? And the third is the social viral loop, where essentially users are inviting other users because they look better off by inviting users to that platform. They earn social capital as a result of that. Imagine Uber in the early days. You took an Uber and came to work and everybody was driving 1 hour. You would talk endlessly about how your commute was so much easier and you could get so much done. An interesting part about these loops is they die off very quickly, right? Because the moment you have a 10x product in the market, somebody else is going to come in and compete for the share of that usage or that market, right? So it's very important to remember that usually 10x products have a very short life. They scale you very quickly, but they have a very short life, right? Then coming to content, content is basically where the currency is content. So I'll talk about two examples here. One is Pinterest, right? So a user joins Pinterest, creates, some of them create content, some of them pin content. The creation of content gives Pinterest new content, and the pinning of content gives them signals into what content is more valuable. On the basis of that, they redistribute this content to Google SEO. They get more users from there, right? Second example is for company-generated content is something like a B2B use case like HubSpot, right? So HubSpot gets customers. Those customers use HubSpot services. They generate ROI. This ROI generation is converted into a case study into articles, and those articles are then consumed by more marketers who form leads for HubSpot as a product or right? And then you finally have paid ad loops. Paid ad loops are probably the most familiar loops, right? Where in an ads loop, where you're essentially investing money in acquiring users, they give you back gross margin, and that gross margin is reinvested into acquiring users. The most important thing about paid ad loops is that you need to think about payback period, right? So the more your payback period, the lesser effective this loop, right? So your payback, you want your payback in gross margin terms. So payback is very specifically if you spend $100 on acquisition, in how much time do you recover that gross margin? Recover that in terms of gross margin, right? So general helpful heuristic is that your payback needs to be less than 1 year, right? If you want any chance of making a payback loop work, right? And if you have something that is less than 3 months, then you're sitting on a rocket ship, and then you are potentially and then you want to maximize that very quickly. Because the other property of paid ad loops is that they're not very defensible, right? If something's working, other people can come and copy it pretty quickly. It's not very tough to run a paid ads loop, right? And then we come to macro loops. So like I said, macro loops feed micro loops. So the first is direct network effects, of which I've already given examples in terms of, very similar to a personal viral loop. So any business that has a personal viral loop will also have a direct network effect, right? The second is cross-sided network effects, which is something that you see in marketplaces all the time, right? So consider a YouTube marketplace with creators and consumers. More consumers means more revenue for creators, which means more creators, which means more content for consumers in that loop. And the underlying loop of YouTube works better, right? It happens in all your Uber, Zomato, Swiggy, Dunzo marketplaces, right? With respect to partners and users, more orders, more revenue per partner, more revenue per partner, more partners, lesser timeouts, faster tax, more availability, lesser stockouts, a better experience, more retention, etc., right? And then you have data network effects, where you fundamentally are using data that your users are generating to improve your core loops, right? So classic example is something like YouTube, right? You are watching YouTube. Lots of people are watching YouTube. YouTube is applying data network effects at a local and global level. One, it is seeing what you are doing, and on the basis of that, improving your viewing experience. Number one. Number two, it is seeing what everybody is doing and then improving your work viewing experience, both in the form of recommendations and feedback, fundamentally, right? And then you have economies of scale, which is a very common one. More you scale, you're able to procure at lower cost, which means that, let's say a paid ads loop can work faster, for example, right? Because your gross margin is improved. And then you finally have a brand loop, right? And I'll probably spend a little more time here because probably this is one of the most misunderstood ones, right? So brand loop is when you have more customers, the social capital associated with your brand increases, which means that every other loop, whether it is acquisition, retention, etc., everything improves, right? So what that means is that there needs to be a certain degree of social capital associated with your brand, which makes customers want to use that brand to generate some kind of social signal, correct? Now I'll go away from jargon and give you an example. I will buy an apple because it signals that I am creative. That was the original brand attribute that Apple started off with. Right? The core of those customers were designers who were using this product for essentially doing visual design, right? And somehow that skill set became associated with being creative, cool, and that was the beginning of the signaling of Apple, right? If you go back to the early brand campaigns, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about think different, right? And it is a very well thought out brand campaign in that sense, because it speaks to that core social capital that, based on this very small tribe of customers that they were targeting, right? Let's take another example, Nike, right? The social signal that you're sending out while wearing Nike is that you are physically, you're fitness conscious fundamentally, right? It's another positive signal that you're sending out, right? And if you look at the core of Nike, it's about people who are really serious about physical fitness, right? It's about people who are playing sports. It's about people who are exercising. It's about people who are running. Running is a big deal, right? The one core part of Nike's brand in the United States is about runners and running, right? So you want to think about what kind of social capital your brand is basically able to deliver for customers, right? Without that, not all brand building is a brand loop, right? So just that caveat. All right. Now we'll move into a discussion where I'd ideally like to take a couple of examples and talk about them, talk through them. I was going through the examples, and the first one I wanted to talk about, and I think I should exit share more than let's just talk. Right. So there were 3 examples, right, that I wanted to very specifically start with. So the first one, let's start with potentially plan B, if
that's fine. Here. Yeah.
Great. All right. So Neha, before I ask you to talk, I'm a user of the product. Like I have a 4-year-old daughter. Like great product.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So just walk us through what the product is. Walk us through what you think the loop is, and then I'll ask follow-up questions.
Okay. So we are primarily an children's innerwear company where we sell kids underwear, boxers, bloomers, and then of course over the years we expanded into homeware and loungewear. So where everything that a kid needs to be at home, comfortable, and just loungewear, right? We want to stay completely away from fashion. So that's what Plan B is about. The loops, I read through your article and I read through it a couple of times just to understand where exactly I could fit in. And honestly, the first loop is obviously the paid loop, right? The paid ads, where I am doing Facebook and Instagram ads. So I am putting in money to acquire users. The user buys, adds to my gross margin, and then I put that gross margin back into ads again to acquire more users.
Cool. So my follow-up question to you is, do you have a sense of payback yet? Like, have you thought about it from that lens?
In terms of my ROAS?
Right. So if you spend $100, how long does it take you to recover that $100 in terms of gross margin?
No, I haven't yet.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So are you comfortable walking through the math right now? Because we can do that in
Yeah.
different.
Please, let's do it.
Cool. Cool. So let's, you have a handle on CAC is what I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you comfortable sharing that?
So you need me to, I don't mind sharing it right now at all, but you want me to share customer acquisition cost?
Yeah.
Okay, I will have to. I wish Sharad, you had asked me to.
Ballpark, please. Like I don't want an exact thing. Even a plus minus 30-40% is enough for the conversation's context.
So I know right now, currently my ROAS is at about, I know customer acquisition, but my ROAS is very low right now. During COVID.
So let's talk ROAS. We'll derive from that.
Yeah. So the COVID times, it used to be nearly 10x and 6x, and it was some insane amounts. And right now we're literally clocking a 2x and not more.
Got it. Now, when you're looking at ROAS, your return is gross margin ROAS or GMV ROAS?
GMV.
GMV ROAS. Okay. And what time window are you considering for this ROAS?
Per month.
Per month. Got it. And when you look at ROAS, are you doing this on a base of existing customers or new customers?
All customers.
All customers. So this is blended.
Yeah, blended. All the customers that come and buy on my website.
Got it. Cool. So what you want to do is, and I'll give you a quick and dirty way of essentially, figuring this out yourself, and you should do this, right? Firstly break your spend into new and return, right? Returning customers, right? For new customers, start with impressions, go down to first transaction, basically transaction, right? You will have a CAC there, right? And then look at, for each customer that you have acquired, how much do they, how many times do they transact again through as far as you can go. So basically what I'm asking you to do is a cohort analysis, right? If you can go 12 months, that's amazing. If you can go 6 months, do that. If you can go only 3 months, do that, right? And then you can extrapolate potentially with some assumptions, right? And add to the CAC cost whatever you are spending on returning customers, right? And then calculate all the gross margin that you're getting from this customer, starting the first transaction to wherever you're looking at it, right? And essentially look at, if you're, hypothetically speaking, if you're spending 500 rupees on CAC, and if it takes you 1 year to get this money back from this customer in terms of gross margin, then your payback is 1 year, right? This payback is the single biggest constraint in your equation, right? Because this defines, the lower your payback, the more money flows through in every cycle. So for you, let's assume a cycle is 1 month, right? Which is where you're making your capital decisions, right? But your payback possibly isn't 1 month, right? Your payback is potentially 3 months, 6 months. What that means is that you're actually cycling money only at a rate of 6 months, right? Which means that this loop will go slower compared to, let's say, if the money was cycling at a rate of 1 month, right? And that has a significant compounding effect over time, by the way, right? So calculate this, and this then, when you identify this value, your entire strategy and roadmap then becomes a function of this, right? And then you want to figure out that, okay, if payback is, for argument's sake, let's say it's 2 years, then you have a very clear goal that you need to get it down to 1, right? And then you want to think through what are the inputs into driving that payback. It could be impression to click, I don't know. It could be click to session, I don't know. It could be session to first transaction potentially. It could be first transaction to second transaction. I don't know, right? You will have to find that leverage point. And once you find that leverage point, you will be able to build a very specific roadmap to solve for that, right? So that is what I wanted to highlight. I see a lot of raised hands, so let's go over the questions.
Yeah, we can follow the order. Maybe Divya, and then Apar. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. This is such an interesting topic. So for us, our CAC is 2,100, which is almost 50% of our marketing cost. So our average order value is 4,300, right?
Okay.
My COGS is 25%.
Okay.
So I'm obviously not in a profitable place, but reaching break even. So what is your maths when you're trying to do this? Am I not getting back the money at the same time?
Right. So see, you said let me first clarify the numbers that you mentioned. So you said your CAC is 2,100.
2,100, this is new customers.
New customer CAC. You said average order value is 4,300.
1,300.
You said COGS is 25%.
25%.
Right. So your gross margin is 75%. Basically.
Let's take it 30% logistics and packaging.
70%. 70%.
Okay.
Okay. Now I need to understand a couple of more things before I can answer this question. After CAC, what is the frequency of transaction?
Usually 3 to 6 months. I usually
after 3 to 6 months, the second transaction will happen.
Yeah. After 6 months, it's kind of trailed off. But usually in 6 months, we see a good repeat. Every month, we are getting a 25% repeat rate.
Okay, so let's say if 100 customers buy for the first time, how many transact in the second month? How many transact in the third month? How many transact in the fourth month? And when does it plateau? Or does it even plateau? Or does it go to zero?
Plateaus after 12 months. But I don't have
and
those
where does
numbers though.
That's okay. So, but can I assume that if 100 people are doing the transaction in the first month, 25% are doing it in the second month? Is that a fair assumption?
Correct.
Chalo, theek hai. And let's assume for argument's sake कि ये 25% flatten out होके 15 या 10 हो जाता है.
Correct.
ठीक है. And let's also assume कि जो कर रहा है वो हर महीने कर रहा है.
हाँ.
ठीक है. और हर महीने जो कर रहा है वो 4,300 कर रहा है.
Correct.
Okay. Firstly, what is this category? It looks amazing.
Silver jewelry.
Got it. And people are buying every month.
So we focus on mass products like toe rings and anklets. So these are products which customer tends to buy on repeat.
Every month.
So now the thing is, the first 3 months is your maximum repeat rate, right? Like you said. And in the second 3 months, the second quarter, it has trailed off to 15% and so on.
Got it. So your frequency also reduces with time because
correct.
You've done your jewelry collection and then your frequency reduces.
Correct. And we try to
should I understand it like that?
Yeah. And we try to bring in collections almost every month, small, so just to keep them coming back.
Cool. Now let's do this math, right? Very basic math. If you're saying your CAC is 2,100 and you're saying first transaction value is 4,000 and your COGS is only 30%, then you're profitable within 1 month.
Which is not the case though.
No, but why would that be then? Then something is wrong in the math, in the assumptions.
The 50% is our marketing cost. 2,100 is the CAC to get in your new customer.
Oh, so you're spending on repeat customers also. Got it. Sorry, my bad. So that is not factored in this equation, right? So basically your retention is a function of marketing cost as well, right? So you need to add that to your CAC.
Okay.
Right? Because ultimately you're looking at it from the lens of one customer who was acquired in one point in time. And how much soever you may spend on this customer in the future needs to be added back to the CAC.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That is why it's not looking profitable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So therefore the point is that if you were to take away all future spends, what would this equation look like? That's one way of looking at it. That would give you a very easy answer. So what you can very easily do to validate to basically figure out this loop math is to 1 महीना आप अपना return marketing, repeat customer marketing का spend 0 कर दो, for example, है ना? और फिर उस cohort को observe करो, उस पे कभी खर्चा मत करना फिर से, उस cohort पे जो उस महीने में acquire हुआ है, right? And then just observe that cohort for 3 months, right? And you'll figure out what your loop math actually looks like.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much. That was really nice. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Apar, yeah.
Hi, Akshay. So two questions. One was an original question. Second came from whatever you told Divya right now. So the first question is, when you were talking about recovery of your CAC from the gross margin on a, in how many months are you able to do that? Why are we not considering overheads and shipping costs into factoring this? Because that then everything then just flows into the P&L, right? Not just the CAC.
So I'm asking you to look at it from the perspective of gross margin, right?
Okay.
So gross margin is fundamentally all your variable costs, correct?
Right. Right.
उसके ऊपर आपका contribution margin आता है, जिसमें आपके सारे marketing costs आते हैं. तो इसमें आपका payback खत्म, correct? अब इसके ऊपर आते हैं overhead which is fixed. My assumption also is that your fixed is not going to scale with time, na?
Okay.
Right? Unless and until you have a fixed, unless you have a model where your fixed is also variable with time. In that case, I would question कि वो gross margin में क्यों नहीं आ रहा है? फिर आपने P&L गलत.
Correct. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I did not look at it from that point of view. Got it. Okay, so the second question is, and it's a very tactical question, what you told Divya right now, how do you actually calculate कि आपने repeat customer transaction drive करने के लिए from the same customer, you know? So for example, we run remarketing campaigns on Facebook. Last 365 days purchasers को remarketing campaign run करते हैं. We get the number of transactions that are driven there, right? But then how do you attribute it to a particular customer? I mean,
you can do it. I can give you the complex answer and the simple answer, right? And both have value, right? The simple answer has value to just get a quick ballpark sense, right?
Yeah.
And the simple answer is simple, right? साल में कितना खर्चा किया देखो, उस साल में कितना न्यू पे किया खर्चा वो देखो, रिपीट पे कितना खर्चा किया वो देखो,
and divide. Yeah.
ठीक है. और फिर ये देख लो कि और फिर एक कोहॉर्ट बना लो, राइट? कि न्यू कैसे जा रहा है, right? For every 100 customers that you acquire, how much dhanda are you getting over a period of time, right? And then you can do the math, right? Because you have the new user cost, you have the repeat user cost, which is also going into the new user cost, no technically, right? And then you have the repeat this thing that you're getting as a result of it, the dhanda that you're getting as a result of it, right? And then you have payback fundamentally. This is the cheap way of doing it, right? The expensive way of doing it is to actually attributing every dollar to every customer and then putting it back to the cohort, right? Saying that, okay, this impression was on this customer who is in that cohort, right? But that requires you to do a significant amount of customer ID mapping, basically, right? You will have to map transaction data to customer ID. You will have to map impression data to customer ID. You will have to map click data to customer ID. You'll have to basically do a significant data exercise, right? Not worth it at your point, right? That's why I called it out.
Fair enough. Got it.
This is good to do at probably maybe Dunzo, maybe not even Dunzo at this point, maybe Swiggy level, like that scale.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, Aditya. Yeah, that's question.
Hey, Akshay. Akshay, I'm one of the founders of LDU, which is in the fashion tech space, primarily apparel. I just wanted to brainstorm these numbers to get some better idea. So at a larger level, for an AOV of, let's say, 2,000 rupees, with a ROAS of roughly 2. So CAC is broadly around 1,000, 1,200 rupees. And we have a gross margin also to the tune of 50%. So at a unit economics level, like if you just look at AOV minus the CAC minus the COGS, we kind of break even on the first transaction. So one, would it be fair to say the payback happens on the first transaction itself, purely in terms of gross margins, like you were saying?
Can I revisit the numbers, please?
Sure.
So firstly, you said CAC was $1,200, correct?
Yeah.
Secondly, you said AOV was 2,000 rupees.
Correct.
Thirdly, you said gross margin was 50%.
50%. Broadly.
Fourthly, you said ROAS was 2. What is this ROAS of? Of repeat customer spend?
No, ROAS is the blended ROAS, which means if we are spending 100 rupees,
and what? Got it. Somebody. And CAC you know separately, which is 1,200. Got it. Okay. And if you're spending 100 rupees totally, how much are you spending on new and repeat?
So, I mean, we don't calculate that as of today separately.
That's the single variable missing in this equation. The moment you have that variable, you will have the answer.
Okay.
Right. But even if you don't, you don't even need that, right? So look at it simply from the perspective of the same answer that I gave to the previous question, right? All you need is the cohort, right? One cohort which is significant enough, and you have enough time to look at key first transaction kitna hai, second transaction and so on and so forth. Even 3 months will be good enough to give you a sense on it, right? And then you need to know how much are you spending on these customers over those 3 months, right? Roughly, that's all you need. If you have this, then you will be able to identify what your payback is fairly simple.
So just for the, I mean, broadly, we don't spend a lot on the existing users. We typically use email and WhatsApp, which doesn't cost a lot, primarily.
Which doesn't cost.
Yes. So let's say for the sake of the argument, the entire, like the amount spent on existing users is negligible.
Then you're almost making payback, right? Because you were telling me that your CAC is 1200. And, first transaction value is 2000.
Yeah.
And gross margin is 50%. Then you're getting you're getting 1,000 rupees back on the first transaction, right?
Yeah. So it'll be fair to say the payback happens broadly on the first transaction itself, right?
It doesn't happen on the first transaction. It will happen roughly. Let's assume that 20% of these customers come back again next month. Even if 20% of those customers come back again, then you are getting payback in 2 months. Right? Because saying that payback is 1 month is not entirely accurate. It's very close to 1 month, basically.
Understood. Right. And in this kind of a scenario, what should be, like, in your opinion, what should be the strategy to keep this loop running sustainably?
Great question. Right. What you need to do is now 2 things, right? One is that you need to understand your TAM, because you are getting these economics at a certain scale of spending. Correct? And very quickly, as qualified audience gets over, the economics of this CAC will change significantly. Correct? That's point one. So you need a better understanding of your TAM. And that can happen only 2 ways. One is obviously qualitatively speaking to customers, and B is actually spending and figuring it out. Right? So that's 2. That's point 1. Point 2 is, given that you have such a payback, you would want to aggressively invest, basically. Keeping in mind that, hey, it can worsen at any point, so you have to be very conscious of keeping that in mind. Correct? So that's the second thing. Third thing is that because you know that it is going to worsen, you want to basically very quickly apply all the optimization strategies to get this CAC down as much as possible, or improve that payback as much as possible. By optimization strategies, I'm talking about performance marketing optimization strategies. Right? So as part of your strategy, part of your strategy should be getting somebody on board who can do this for you. Because and this is actually very nicely feeding into my hiring argument, because what you now know is that there is a model and it works. Correct? You want to very quickly leverage it and do it the right manner, right? So you basically need to either internally identify somebody who's a generally smart person, entrepreneurial, has a builder attitude, right? Either get somebody like that and give them ownership of this problem, and with, you know, whatever freedom they require to hire channel managers or whatever, for example, or you get somebody from outside who matches the skill sets required to solve for this. Because remember, you will need somebody who is going to build, and let me be very clear when I say something like that. You're going to need somebody who is going to build the attribution. That requires getting your hands dirty. It requires looking at raw data of impressions, device ID, install date. ये सब देखना पड़ता है, right? Bina raw data देखे, like without consuming thousands and thousands of rows of raw data, you don't get to an attribution understanding. You have to really get your hands dirty, right? So you need somebody with that attitude. So when you're hiring performance marketers from outside, you know, you want to think through कि यार कैसा type का person चाहिए.
Understood.
Right? So those will be the implications on your strategy in my head.
Got it. So this is really
that's one, and that's one. That's two. Sorry. The last thing is that you want to start looking for new loops now itself, because let's assume that कुछ 20 महीना, 24 महीना, 36 महीना में this will plateau out, right? Given and it needs to align with your scale ambitions. Are you taking in VC money? If yes, you need a loop. You need another loop. If you are doing this in a bootstrap manner, maybe you don't need another loop. You have an ambition of doing certain amount of turnover in a certain per annum, and that one loop is good enough. आपका चलता रहेगा, एक बंदा बनाता रहेगा. Right? So you need to be very clear what your ambitions are, right? and accordingly think about your next steps, right? Whether if you're really ambitious and you want to hyperscale, you're looking at VC scaling kind of thingy, then you want to think of other routes, because then otherwise you won't grow beyond a certain point.
Understood. So I think some of what you said, we've kind of already validated that. So hence the kind of follow up. So earlier the CAC used to be, which is around 1200, used to be somewhere close to 700, 800. So we already know that the CAC is kind of going up, even though the TAM is fairly large, but maybe because of Facebook changes, etc., etc. So hence, I mean, what we're trying to focus on is how we can try and get more people to either come back themselves or refer more people, so that at least at a blended level, we can try and keep the CAC low and still go after new customers, even if the number from 1200 goes to say 1500 tomorrow.
No, what you're saying is that you're saying two things, right? One is that you are trying to increase retention and money spent per acquired customer, so that payback improves, or payback rather stays the same, even if CAC increases. Correct. That's the first thing you're saying. And the second thing you're saying is that you're trying to kick in a referral loop.
Yeah. But I think what we are not able to solve for right now is that loop, although we've like kind of put in a referral program. I mean, we have incentives for people to come back and buy again. The loop, I'm not able to figure out what's the friction to actually get that flywheel running. And I think that's one of the pain points that we're trying to solve for. If you have any input, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, so see, my general sense on referral is that I'm pessimistic about it as a channel, right? Okay. Because as a macro, there's a macro effect playing out, right? Which is that there has been too much referral that has happened, right? So there is this, and it happens with every channel, right? It's been called various things over a period of time. The law of shitty click-throughs is one of those things, right? Every channel goes through that, and referral is going through that right now, right? WhatsApp right now is hot. It will go through it. In another 3 months, expect WhatsApp as a channel to really deteriorate in terms of ROI, for example, right? So I'm generally pessimistic on referral. But what that means is that for referral to work, it has to be a groundbreaking referral, either in terms of incentive or in terms of category or value proposition. Otherwise, it will not work generally, right? And ultimately, it's a mathematical equation, right? The point is you have X users. How many of those users, every user, how many people are able to generate new users? For every user, how many new users are you able to generate? That's the K factor fundamentally, right? And referral typically really works when that K factor is greater than equal to 1. Do that math, you will be far away from 1. And getting to 1 is crazy. And the only success stories that I have seen are usually in new categories, because there's a newness to the value proposition. So every success story that I know on referral is Uber, new category, Dropbox, new category, right? And you can think of any of these case studies that you keep reading about, right? Usually they're new categories. So my general sense on pessimism is, general sense on referral is a sense of pessimism, honestly.
Understood. So anything else where you feel we should be actually putting in the effort to bring that next loop?
No, I'm not saying abandon referral. What I want you to do is essentially look at the steps of the referral, right? So you have users. Out of those users, how many are inviting? Those who invite, how many do they invite? Out of the invites that go out, how many join? And out of the people who join, how many do give you revenue? And then that loop, right? I would want you to get into the specifics of those steps and really measure where is the point of leverage fundamentally, like where is the drop off, right?
Understood.
And then you will have to go back and ask a customer, right? And like this is have to be some sort of conversation with the customer to understand why that's not happening, right? Number one, why is it exciting? Like, let's assume that the drop off, and in all probability, the drop off is either number of customers to those who send invites or invites sent to accepts. Right? Usually इनका problem होती है, right? क्योंकि अगर कोई invite कर रहा है तो वो तो invite कर ही देगा. At least 1% तो invite कर ही देगा, right? Of course, you have points of leverages here also. For example, like Hotmail. Right? Why did referral work for Hotmail? Because every person sends X number of emails every day, and in every email it's written over there below, sent from Hotmail. Right? So the number of invites per user was very high. And the number of users who were sending invites was also very high, because everybody was using email or sending an invite. Right? So you need to figure this out mathematically and then figure it out qualitatively as well as to what will move the needle mathematically. And I will come to some of this in my Dunzo session as well, because like these are the kind of questions that we answered at Dunzo, and like hopefully, and there is a referral example there also. So I'll talk through that as well.
Super. Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay, I think we are going to not do another example. That's right. Because otherwise we won't have time for the rest of the.
Yeah, but actually, I think we don't need another example, but maybe like I think the misconception around a brand loop for many people, if we just sort of cover 5 minutes on that, I think will be valuable. Because
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So see, I think I tried to spend that time earlier as well, right? So what you fundamentally need to think through is that does the brand have that kind of capital or not, right? And if not, what do you need to get that kind of capital? And then and is it even possible? So you want to be really honest about, you know, whether a brand loop really exists in your case or not, right? And one way to understand this is that one way to answer this in a yes or no format in some way or the other is to look at that when you do brand spends, how much does it improve your performance funnels, for example, right? So a classic example is Cred, right? So Cred, when they deploy brand spends, their funnels go off the roof, right? I know this because I've spoken to the folks there. Let's not get into the question of the business model of Cred, etc., right? Let's very specifically talk about Cred as a brand. There are two things. One is Cred has created a new category, and that is typically the case with any strong brand group. You typically end up creating a new category, right? Credit card bill payment was a non-existent category, right? You would do that on your credit card on website, bank website, right? Or you would do it on your own bank website. There was no category around it, right? Number one. Number two, every time they spend on brand dollars, their signups go bonkers, right? The conversion rate from sign up to bill payment increases significantly. And I'm not talking about like 20%, 25%. I'm talking about 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x, like that, those kind of numbers, right? 10x numbers, literally. That is when you know that you have a brand loop working for you, right? However, the problem with the brand loop is that you really have to end up spending a lot of money to really figure out whether it is working, right? So my simple submission to people, to brand owners or founders at lower scales of business is to honestly not think about brand too much, right? Focus on your customer. Create a value proposition backwards of that customer that is really strong and sticky. The brand will happen if it has to happen, right? Focus on the customer. And I think this will be true of all of these businesses that you have seen, whether it is Apple, whether it is Nike, whether it is any of these businesses. They started off backwards of the customer, created a really sticky value proposition. It worked. There's a tribe that got created in the beginning. And then that kicked off the brand loop. The spends happened later, right? So that is my 2 cents on building a brand loop. I see a hand. I'll take the question.
Yeah, Supreet.
Hi, Akshay, we are running a business which is right now not selling online D2C. We sell breads and mostly through local marketplaces. But we have some ideas on what we might want to do, but I'm just getting a little scared, hearing the CAC numbers. So I just wanted to get a sense from your experience on if one was to decide a portfolio of products and one wants to launch it either on marketplaces or on own website, are the average numbers of marketing on marketplaces lesser than own website?
So my sense is that typically, let me answer this slightly differently. Okay. Most of the businesses that we talk about are 10 to 25 million TAM businesses in India. Right? That's it. Right. Those are the number of customers out there, nothing more. Right.
10 to 25, sorry, can you just help me understand that?
10 to 25 million customers in India. That's it.
Okay. Okay.
Right. This should not be surprising, right? These are the paying customers in India. There is nobody else. right?
Yeah.
At a 10 to 25 million scale, right? I think our best case CAC scenario is 500.
Okay.
And this may come down to 250 for very specific use cases. Like I know, for example, for bike rides, this can come, like bike sharing categories, this can come down to 200, 250, right? But something like Zomato, Swiggy, Dunzo, like, all of these things, categories that I have, worked a lot on, 500 is the number. And this is on the lower side, right? And as you can see from the numbers that you're hearing over here, realistically, that number will be closer to 1,000, right? Depending on the friction on the category, depending on the like. So a lot of the factors are like how frequent is the category, right? How much decision-making friction is there in the category, right? How much intent is already there on the category, right? So typically your CAC will be lower when your applicability is broader, your TAM is broader, basically, right? So that's the way to, kind of heuristically put yourself on the CAC spectrum and see where will you land, right? Higher frequency, lower CAC, simply put, right? Lower frequency, higher CAC, simply put, right? Higher top of mind category, lower CAC, right? Lower top of mind category, higher CAC, right? So there are these, basic behaviors that you can use to kind of heuristically arrive at what will define CAC. And then you can look at, few examples. So basically your range will be 500 to 2,000, right? Of course, there will be categories with more than 2,000 also, but those are different kinds of categories. So forget that.
Sorry, my question actually was that if one had a portfolio of products and wanted to launch them on either marketplace or own website, is it that the marketing spends on an average from your experience on marketplaces is lesser because the paying customers are already there looking for products?
Good question. See, I've never advertised on marketplaces, right? So let's get down to brass tacks, right? Amazon is the biggest marketplace, right? So it's fundamentally about spending on Amazon versus spending on Google versus spending on Facebook, right? So the way I would go about evaluating any channel is that, and there are a lot of factors, but the one factor that determines, which is contextual to this question, is how close to the purchase decision is the customer in that channel, right? In a channel like Facebook, you're very far away from that purchase decision because you've gone to Facebook to browse content. Correct. On a channel like Google search, you're very close to the purchase decision because you're searching for that product, right? On Amazon, it depends, right? So if you're being given a non-contextual ad on the homepage, then it is closer to Facebook, but not as close to Facebook because at least you're in shopping intent, correct? If it's being given to you in the search feed, when you're searching for a contextual or similar category product, then it is closer to shopping. Google Shopping or Google Search, right? So that is how I would evaluate the decision. What that basically means is that you would first primarily maximize platforms like search, shopping, and Amazon, and then move to Facebook, right? Because that would be furthest away in terms of the shopping intent, right? But what you will find is that these channels also get exhausted very quickly. So within 3 months, you will feel the need to do Facebook. That will happen, of course, given your budget appetite.
Great, Akshay.
Cool.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the rest of the session. Just give me a second. Cool. I hope it's visible.
Yep.
All right, I'm assuming it's visible. Cool. All right. So what we're going to go through now is basically this process for you to essentially build a growth strategy. And we're going to go through this process with the example of Dunzo, right? So let's just go through these steps, right? So the first is that you really got to spend time understanding your customer and your use case, right? And then once you do that, you want to figure out what your primary value promise is. What are you delivering to these customers and how strong it is fundamentally as a value proposition, right? And then you want to identify your core loop and your loop steps. you want to build formulas, mathematical formulas for each of these steps based on the inputs. You want to feed your input current actuals and your future assumptions and project outputs over time. So you want to see how this grows over time. You want that predictability, right? And then you want to identify your points of leverage. Go back to your customers, understand the pain points in the context of the points of leverage, and then build a roadmap and test that roadmap to improve the points of leverage. Then you layer more routes and you keep repeating this process. This is the process to essentially drive growth. It's a very helpful, methodology to essentially, make this extremely objective and structured, right? So I'm going to start with Dunzo. See, for us at Dunzo, we were very clear that we wanted to focus on the consumables business, right? So when it comes to the consumable business, our use cases, so again, we were lucky, right? We had, when we were doing this analysis, 2.5 million signups had already happened in Bangalore, right? A lot of them had churned, sure, but at least we had the data of what those customers did, etc. So for us, the way we derived all of this information was by not just speaking to customers, but also looking at a lot of data at scale, right? So our insights were obviously a lot richer, but just putting this caveat out there, right? So what we found was that when we spoke to customers who were basically using Dunzo every week, fundamentally, for ordering groceries, we asked them, why do you use them or use us? So they gave us these three answers. The first was that they wanted to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy products, basically daily, weekly groceries, right? But they didn't have the time to step out, right? There are other alternatives, which is, for example, Big Basket, or wasn't quick enough, because then you have to plan your life, right? Number one. Number two, when it comes to Big Basket, fresh quality is not good, right? So you are making a compromise on quality if you're ordering fresh from Big Basket. So that was the problem with that online alternative. The offline alternatives are basically your kirana, right? And if your constraint is that you don't want to step out, then you're going to have to call this route. And then there is a degree of reliability, both in terms of time and quality, right? Unless, of course, you have a great relationship with this shopkeeper, which is an important point, right? And what does it mean? It means that I have unreliability in terms of quality. I have unreliability in terms of when it is being delivered. I have unreliability in terms of cancellations, item missing. And what this means is that this is a lot of grocery planning, firstly, and then there's a lot of chaos also, right? So this was the first use case. The second use case was that I sometimes run out of groceries and I want to replenish them or top them up immediately. I'm making a certain kind of chicken, I'm missing a sauce or something like that, or missing a vegetable or something like that. I want to order that 1 or 2 items right now. I need them in the next 30 minutes. So the first use case is what we call daily, weekly, fresh. The second use case is what we call top up and emergency, right? And the third use case is basically I want to indulge in cravings whenever I want without making an effort, fundamentally, right? I don't want to step out. I'm a lazy person, and I value my time over money. So I want a snack, I want a beverage, I want a cigarette, I want a rolling paper, so on and so forth, right? Now, obviously, as you can imagine, these are very different kinds of use cases. So there were different kinds of users, right? So the first kind of users was basically 30+ rich migrant families. So there are two, three qualifiers here, and I'll explain each of these. 30+ implies a certain life stage, means usually bacha hai, which means that your life is a little more structured. Your meal planning is a little more structured because obviously you could cater for a child, right? So 30+ implies that. Rich implies that you value time over money. Migrant implies that you don't have deep connections with shopkeepers locally, right? Right. So there's a qualifier in each of these. Then comes the 20 to 30, not poor migrant settler, bachelors. Again, there is qualifier in each of these. One is age, which means life stage of being bachelors. B is not poor, meaning given that life stage, they're well off, but compared to the previous cohort, they're not as well off, right? And these could be both migrant and settlers, because they're like the younger folks don't have relationships with shopkeepers, especially for their use cases of especially indulgences, right? And then you have 30 plus rich settler families, different from migrant families in the sense that they're settlers, they're from the city, which means that this use case, the top use case, is a little more difficult with them because they have relationships with shopkeepers, local shopkeepers, right? They have rituals, they have relationships, rituals of going out on a day and every day and buying, relationships in terms of, hey, I can call this person up and I can trust the quality of the items that this person delivers. And third, you had neither rich nor poor migrant families. Again, qualification being 30 plus meaning life stage, but not poor meaning convenience not being as strong as a motivator for them, right? Now, it's very important for me to, I'll belabor this definition of user demographics. This translated back to a certain TAM, right? We were able to, basis these definitions, very clearly say what our TAM is. Within that TAM, we had different segments, and we knew that those different segments would give us different amount of revenue, because not all their use cases were fundamentally different, right? And we also knew that with different segments, acquisition would be more difficult / easy. So for example, the most difficult segment to acquire over here would be 30 plus rich settler families, right? And the most difficult segment to drive habit formation would be potentially 20 to 30 not poor migrant settler bachelors. Right? So it gave us very real expectations of who our TAM was and what we should expect. Right? Basis this, what is our daily? We identified our value proposition. Value proposition is very simple: good quality, low priced, fresh fruits, vegetables, and daily groceries, home delivered in under 30 minutes. What does this mean? So this is obviously a feature. This is not a value proposition. This is a benefit, not a value proposition. The value proposition is basically the use cases that I get my daily, weekly, fresh without the hassle of planning. That I get whatever if I forget something, I can get it right now. And if I'm craving for something, I'll be able to get it right now, right? What is the loop? The loop is a paid ads loop, right? And this is the first loop that we focused on, because this was the only loop that had ever worked for us in the past. And of course, it was very easy to get kickstarted, right? But like I said, this can't be the only loop, right? So we obviously have other loops playing on top of this, but we said that we will kickstart the engine with this loop, and then we'll think about the other loops. So what are the other loops? Let's also qualify those. The other loops are basically a cross-sided network effects loop. More users, more revenue per partner, more partners, better user experience, right? So that's one. The second was an economies of scale loop. So because, and I'll come to that later, because we went into direct sourcing, what this means is, at more scale, we can get products at better margin and endure lesser waste, which improves our gross margin over a period of time. And then there's a financial viral loop as well, which is basically a referral loop that we laid on top of this. And there could potentially be a brand loop, but let's, like I said, ignore that for the time being, right? So what's the loop? The loop is, sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So the loop is that there is new paid traffic. This traffic, out of this traffic, some customers habit form. You also have habit from customers from the previous cycle. Cumulatively, they form the total habit formed users. These give you gross margin in that cycle. You take that gross margin and reinvest that in ad impressions, and as a result, you get paid installs and re-engagements, as a result of which you get new paid traffic, right? Now, in this loop, you can add certain fuel / accelerants. You can put additional growth dollars here, and you can add organic traffic here. Here, for example, organic traffic is not a loop, because as you get more users, it's not as if you're getting more data or more content to put out there for SEO, right? So there is no loop here in terms of SEO. So the next step is to fundamentally break this down into formulas. So not complex at all. So basically, new paid traffic is nothing but conversion rate from this step to this input into conversion rate from this step to this step. This is nothing but conversion, this input into conversion rate from this step to this step, which is basically habit formation rate. This is basically this plus this into conversion rate from this step to this step, which is basically this into churn rate of those users. This is nothing but these users into average number of orders per month into AOV per order into gross margin per order. And that gives you gross margin. Of course, then you get ad impressions simply as a function of what is your CPM. And then that gives you a certain number of installs and re-engagements at a certain rate, right? Now, those are the formulas. Now, what we did was that what you need to do next is you basically need to feed your inputs, actuals, and future input assumptions over a period of time. So, right. So this will basically translate into all of these metrics, output steps as columns, and cycles, or basically time periods. In our case, it was 1 month, as rows. And you will then basically populate, like I said, input actuals and future input assumptions and project outputs over time. In our case, we took 3 assumptions. The first assumption we took was that this additional growth dollars is equal to 0. Then we said that therefore all ad spend was equal to GM, right? Because we wanted to understand that if we were going to run this in the right manner, what does growth look like? That was one. Second is we assumed that paid traffic divided by installs reduces over time, and installs divided by impressions also decreases over time. Because like I said, all performance marketing channels degrade over time because qualified audiences expire. And this is what our curve looked like. Now, as you can imagine, this is a bad curve, because what this is telling you is that you don't have a sustainable growth engine. This loop is not working for you. By the way, why does this curve look like it does? Because payback, when we calculated payback, it came out to 7 years. This is all of these assumptions. Now, when you have payback of 7 years, because it takes so long for you to reinvest that money, that loop doesn't work. So we basically, sorry, not 7 years, 6 years. So we were very clear that our payback had to come down by 6 times, right? And so what we did was we essentially looked at the various conversion rates at various steps, looked at what the benchmarks for those, what were reasonable benchmarks for those conversion steps in the market. And we said, okay, the 2 key points of leverage in this equation are, number 1, if we were to increase traffic to habit formation by 3x, and if we were able to increase ad impressions to traffic by 2x, then our curve would move from being at the blue line to being at the yellow line. And also, why does this curve start sloping downwards? Because I have an assumption that certain of these conversion rates will keep degrading over a period of time, right? So we said, okay, these are our points of leverage, mathematically speaking. But what will we have to do to actually exploit or improve these points of leverage? So for that, we went back to customers who didn't habit form. And we asked them, why didn't you habit form? And they told us a bunch of different things. The first thing that they told us was that they also had the same 3 use cases, but they want, and those 3 use cases, technically translated back to 2000 SKUs. But when customers wanted to order these items, only 60% of these items were actually available in the top stores, right? So it was, so if you're not able to, even make these items available, then there's absolutely no way that habit formation is going to happen, or even trial is going to happen in a lot of cases, right? The second is that customers wanted to buy items, right? Customers have come for a use case, but the way our product UI UX was designed was that first customers were made to choose a store, and then they went into the store And because sometimes the store would not have items available, they would fail to build cart. Then they would come back out of that flow, choose another store. And remember, I said a large part of our audience is migrants. They don't know which stores are good or bad, right? So they don't know where to order from. So this is an increased problem statement for those customers, right? The third was that for whatever arbitrary reason, we had a delivery fee, right? And it was variable based on distance of the store. Now, it's not the customer's fault that the store is far away from them, right? They came to buy items. And what we also knew is basis, statistical analysis, that the elasticity threshold of, how much a customer was willing to pay for delivery fee was basically 10% of order volume, right? As the order volume, delivery fee increased greater than 10% as a percentage of the order volume, the conversion rate at that step started dropping significantly, right? So given that we are a variable based on distance of the store, this was happening too often, and therefore customers were also not habit forming because their value promise just didn't make sense, like from the point of view of the value that they were getting in terms of convenience versus the cost that they had to pay for delivery. And the third was, and the fourth was that, if you looked at, the core use case was fresh, right? And we weren't able to monitor and influence the quality of fresh items, resulting in variable and poor quality, right? So that again hinders in habit formation, right? So new users were, and lastly, when we looked at new users who didn't even try, or installs or signups that didn't even try us, they said that, hey, we came for a very different value proposition altogether. Because when we look back at our communications and what our app store and play store looked like, we used to say things like, get anything home delivered from anywhere, right? That's a very different communication and a value promise articulation compared to saying that get your daily weekly fresh in 30 minutes, no more grocery planning or something like that, right? So we were not even priming our customers for the primary value promise as we were delivering installs or driving, or as we were delivering impressions, right? So as a result of this, what did our roadmap look like, right? So our roadmap looked like basically, number one, improve availability of those 2000 SKUs by either building micro fulfillment centers or partnering with stores, right? So either way, we had to figure this out, right? Second was we had to build a more intuitive and easy product first buying experience on the app. So the customer comes to the app, they see items, they see subcategories. They don't have to have the stress of choosing a store, right? Third was that we basically moved to a flat delivery fee model which could be waived on delayed delivery, right? And fourth, we built user experiences and journeys to nudge users into taking actions that had a higher probability of habit formation and long-term retention, right? So for example, we knew that if somebody ordered the daily, weekly fresh SKUs in the morning, their probability of habit formation was 2x. Why? Because customers have an inherent morning behavior of ordering for the daily, weekly fresh, right? So once you get into that existing behavior, the probability of habit formation becomes very high. So we basically started designing morning sales, morning initiatives and stuff like that, right? Nudging customers into ordering in the morning. Similarly, we knew that there were these 25 SKUs that if the customer bought on their first order, they had a very high chance of habit formation. So what SKUs the customers saw in their first app open, what use cases and push notifications we sent to these customers after app open and not ordering after, let's say, a certain window, were all tweaked to include these 25 habit forming SKUs in their use cases. Another insight that we had was that greater than 350 ordering had a very high correlation with habit formation. So we had incentives designed to essentially get non-habit form customers to order greater than 350 because then they would see greater value in the value promise. And finally, we also saw that people who had adopted pay later had a very high probability of habit formation. So we started creating payment incentives for new customers to improve habit formation. So all of these were essentially part of the roadmap to improving the first point of leverage, which was traffic to habit formation. When it came to impressions to traffic, two things that we planned in our roadmap. First was that we had to communicate better. We had to communicate our top use cases and our products in the ads. And second is that we had to optimize our campaigns differently. Right. So earlier we used to optimize purely for signups. Now that didn't make any sense because 2.5 million customers in Bangalore had already signed up. So we started optimizing for visits, which is basically both installs and re-engagements or app opens, and then habit formation. And then we would exclude anybody who basically became habit from both these campaigns. Right. And very well for us. So like this was the roadmap that we built. And with this roadmap, we were actually able to get on this path. Right. So now there is public information. I can share it. Dunzo is now at 2 million weekly orders monthly. It's grown tremendously, and it's a function of essentially, this strategy playing out over a 1.5 year period, right? The next part of this is that, of course, you want to layer more loops, right? Like I said, this is not the only loop that can that can work. So you have to layer more loops if you're looking at it slightly more long term. And one of the loops that we wanted to layer on top of it was basically the paid loop. And when we built so I haven't gotten into the details of the paid loop in the same level of detail as I have for the paid loop. I haven't gotten into the details of the referral loop as much as I have gone for the paid loop. But ultimately what we realized was that we had an opportunity to increase our users to inviters by 3x and invite per user by 3x, right? And the reason why we thought that was basically because our original construct for referral, incentivized sign up, and users had run out of friends to sign up to invite in Bangalore. Like I said, 2.5 million signups in Bangalore is a lot. The internet population of Bangalore is 6 million, right? And our TAM was clearly less than 2.5 million. So there was absolutely no way that customers could actually, there was no way for them to, invite their friends. That was one. Second was that we found that our referral construct, and there's context to this. We toned down our referral construct significantly over a period of time because A, the loop wasn't working anymore, right? Because people had run out of friends to invite, and B, we've seen a bunch of fraud in it, right? So we had misused it. So we reduced the incentive to 50. So get 50, give 50, and that doesn't make sense, right? Because if you fundamentally look at this loop, the friction to invite and the friction to try should be less than the incentive. So this is the order. You have to order for roughly 200, 300, 400, 500 rupees. If the incentive you get is 50 rupees, then it's very hard for that incentive to work, right? So that's another thing. The third is that the incentive didn't incentivize habit formation because we gave the incentive on sign up. Right? Habit formation was, I don't think I defined it earlier, but it was basically 4 orders in 4 distinct weeks over a period of 8 weeks. If customers took that action, then we knew that they had a high probability of retaining over the long term. But our incentive didn't solve for that. So we wanted to basically increase. Actually, I'll come to that. So lastly, our incentive is in the form of cashback, right? Which is pure money, right? The perceived value of this incentive could not be higher than the monetary value. Instead, for example, if I were to waive off delivery fee for X number of orders, because delivery fee is not really technically money, it is a notional charge that I am charging the customer. Technically, my delivery fee can cost 60 rupees, 70 rupees, but over time there is a way to optimize that to even lower, and you can technically charge more delivery fee from customers also over a period of time as the category drives adoption. So the point was to waive off delivery fee could be a potentially better way of essentially designing an incentive rather than cashback. So our roadmap was about changing the action to incentivize, which was basically orders. Our roadmap was around playing with the testing the elasticity of this incentive, taking it up from 50 to 100 to 200, 300, and seeing how that improved the steps of the funnel. Our roadmap was about like I said, changing the incentive structure to do more orders, get more. So for example, if we were to say that get free delivery on your next 4 orders, that's a better incentive, for example. And similarly, instead of cashback, if you were to give delivery fee that aligned with the primary value promise, will be better and increase the perceived value of the incentive rather than the monetary value. So that was what our roadmap for referral looked like. And like I said, in hindsight, it's worked because we reached 2 million weekly orders at Dunzo as a direct result of following the strategy. So that's the process, right? Now, the last thing I want you to that I want to leave you folks with is that how do you hire for this, right? Which is, and I think it's a function of what stage you're at, right? So think of it as answering three questions. The first question is, have you identified your growth model and points of leverage? If your answer is no, then you definitely don't want to be hiring anyone. Your core team needs to figure this out yourself, right? You have the most context, and a growth person will not typically, depends on who you're hiring, but a lot of people won't be interested in the 0 to 1 journey, right? I think you're better off solving this problem yourself, right? That's one. The second is that if the answer to this question is yes, do you know that your growth model works, right? If not, then still don't hire anyone. Test this out yourself, right? For example, a lot of your growth models will be can be tested out initially yourself. You don't need extreme expertise in that specific skill set to be able to figure out whether it's working yourself or not. And I would still recommend that you figure out yourself, right? Because only once you have the answer that it works, should you now try to start hiring. But even now, you shouldn't be hiring a growth head. You now know what your points of leverage are, and therefore what your levers are going to be. Hire for those specific skill sets. If you have a paid loop, hire a performance marketer potentially. Or also, it works out very well often when you find somebody internal with the right qualities, not necessarily the skill sets. The skill sets can be learned. Performance marketing isn't rocket science. None of this is rocket science. If they have the right qualities, then that may also work out really well, right? So if you have somebody who's basically of a builder mindset, somebody who's entrepreneurial in nature, somebody who won't mind getting their hands dirty, especially with things like data. Somebody with the finance business banking background, but is curious about this and has done generalist kind of roles in the last 2 years at startups. A lot of these people are actually sometimes the best candidates to hire at this stage, right? You don't necessarily need somebody who's an expert in that domain, but that can also be answered. So you have two options: either you hire an expert in the domain, or you hire a generalist who is basically got the right qualities. And note that the qualities need to be present in the subject matter expert also, because qualities are not negotiable. The skill sets are. And finally, once you've done this hiring, and then typically your team will get to a 10 people size. When any group team, typically at that stage your company will be 50 to 100 people, and you would have done like doubling every year roughly for 3 to 5 years, right? This is the time to hire a growth head. This is the time to hire a growth head who will come in, create competent teams, reliable systems, repeatable process to drive optimization and scale. That's one. Two is I think you as a founder will never get away from the responsibility of growth. So for example, even at this point, thinking of new loops, you'll have to be actively involved in my head, right, at least. So yeah, that's the way I would think about it in terms of hiring. That's it. That's the session. If there's one last thing I want to leave you with, it is that just generally don't think of growth from the point of view of hacking it, right? Think of growth from the point of view of being strategic about it, following the process diligently, and ensuring that you are building a model, identifying your points of leverage, and then focusing all your energies on those points of leverage. I think that's the right way of doing growth. Yeah, that's it for me. We can open it up to questions because we have we're done before time.
Great. Thank you, Akshay. Anyone have any questions? Can you just raise your hands? Yep, Mohita, start.
Hi, Akshay. So, I'm from Mo's Bakery and we're in the food industry. We make cookies, granola bars and snacks, and we don't have a very high AOV. So initially when we launched, because it was a small, tiny cookie, it was a novel idea. We really leveraged the word of mouth loop. And we saw that, because people thought that, oh, if they ate it at someone's place or it was used as a gifting, we saw that we were getting purchases from there. So we just focused on that. Then once we exhausted that, we switched to the paid ad loops. Now, that hasn't been working for us lately, say iOS, because our average order value is somewhere around 800, 790, 880. Now, product cost is lower, and we were seeing CPAs of, earlier we were seeing CPAs of 250, 350, which was all right for us. But now with 600 CPAs, 700 CPAs, it's not working for us. So I just wanted to understand what are the techniques. We clearly need to move to a different loop. But when we are trying to reinvent the wheel and find another loop, what are the techniques we can use to assess what should be the next loop?
So, great question, by the way. So I'll look at it from two lenses. Sorry, somebody needs to go on mute. Thanks. So I'll answer it in two ways, right? So one is, see that just understand your customers really well, right? And when I say understand your customers, I say 3-4 very specific things. One is like understand the use case, and understanding the use case fundamentally means understanding what their motivations around those use cases are, right? So when you are talking about, for example, small biscuits, right? Understand the motivation behind that snacking occasion and why they would choose this, and what are the alternatives out there, and why would somebody choose this snacking option versus another snacking option, right? Because that's fundamentally what you're playing with, right? Like it's literally a choice between having you versus another biscuit versus having a namkeen versus having a fruit versus etc. Right? So what are the motivations going into making that decision? I think that's fundamentally very important to understand, right? Because any kind of loop definition will be backwards of that, right? So that's one. Two is beyond a certain number of loops, you really can't force loops, honestly, right? With every category, there will be a couple of natural loops that align with that category, right? And then the question is, can that work for you? And it's one way of looking at it is just zooming out and saying that, okay, you are in a food category business, correct? In the food category business, you are in the business of snacking, which basically means certain AOV, certain frequency, certain characteristics in that sense, correct? Zoom out, go to other business, go to all markets and see who are the fastest growing brands with these constraints, right? Same category, same frequency, same AOV, similar customer profile in terms of disposable income, similar motivations, etc., etc. And look at what has worked for them. That is the other way of going about thinking through, brainstorming on loops, rather, right? Because when you come to think of it, this framework has come by observing fast-growing businesses. Cool. So it makes sense sometimes to reverse engineer in this fashion as well. So one is doing it in the bottoms-up fashion, which is going to your customer and then understanding it. And then you do a top-down model also, where you say that, okay, what else is working outside, right? Can I get inspiration from that? I think between the two, you should have an exhaustive answer, honestly. And if you're not finding loops, then that means that you potentially don't have more loops, right? Then you want to think through that, okay, I have a paid loop, right? That paid loop is not working right now because of my AOV frequency, correct? Customer acquire kar liya aapne. Can you get more use cases in that customer's life, which are aligned to this category? Correct? That is the way a lot of D2C brands are thinking about. Correct? So if you look at Whole Truth, for example, Whole Truth is, I think, facing a very similar situation right now, right? From secondary sources, they're in a very similar boat right now, right? Because they have a nice organic, they have some nice organic traffic coming in because they've really invested in educational content around sugar and nutrition in snacking food, right? But the kind of customers who are reading that information are the top 2-3 million in India, right? Nobody beyond the top 2-3 million is thinking about salt kitna hai, sugar kitna hai, biscuit mein, etc. Right? I started thinking about it 2 years back, right? And we're all part of that 5 to 10 million, right? And within that 5 to 10 million also, I think it's only the top 2-3 million are thinking about it. So that's one. Second is with anything like you said, like you saw, right? The paid ads loop will kind of start giving lower returns over a period of time, because the qualified audience will always be that 2-3 million, right? If you're for something that Whole Truth is selling, which is expensive compared to the alternatives, it's the top 2-3 million who are really going to buy in the beginning, right? So the next way of looking at it is, how do you reduce payback, not by focusing on CAC, but by focusing on gross margin, right? So extract more value from the customer is another way to look at it. You don't necessarily need a new loop. You can reinvigorate the existing loop, is the shorter answer that I was trying to.
Basically also looking at increasing the AOV by adding products which are more regularly used by the consumer, more repeat, like Low Foods is doing. So they have atta.
Technically,
low atta.
yeah, absolutely.
So someone will
absolutely.
repeatedly, if they like it, then they will repeatedly order that.
ID is doing the same thing right now, right? ID is doing exactly the same thing right now, because they're saying, okay, now these customers trust me for idli dosa batter. Now let me sell paratha to ready-made paratha to them. Let me sell dosa making accessories to them. Yeah. All right. We can move on.
Soumya. Yep.
Hi Akshay. So thanks for the session. Very interesting. So I have a question. So you spoke about Facebook. And I think somebody had asked a question around marketplaces for fueling, the paid ads loop, right? So in our context, we make shampoo bars and conditioner bars, which are a replacement to your liquid shampoos and conditioners. And it's a sustainable product. And there's a typical cult of people who are very, environment focused and look for options like these. There is a very defined repeatability of it. One bar lasts roughly 2 months or 2.5 to 3 months, depending on the person's, hair length. So we've been seeing patterns. The people who come on our own site, we know the exact pattern as to when they will be able to come back for a repeat order, right? So once you've acquired the customer, the repeatability factor, if the customer has bought in, it's suited, their hair, they are pro environment, they will come back. My challenge is that we made a conscious decision to move away from Facebook ads and burn through budgets and go towards marketplaces to find more such people for a growth loop through paid loops. So, which has worked. And again, with the number of customers that we've acquired over time, there is a very predictable repeatability we are seeing. We are seeing them come back not just for the same repeat order, but for additional products within the same portfolio, because again, it's that cult of people. Now, the challenge is that here is a set of audience which has been acquired through paid loops, but it's on another platform. And tomorrow, if we want to get them to us, to be able to acquire them and to reach out to them for any sort of content loops or anything else, it's very difficult to interact with that user base. But that doesn't disregard the fact that that user base does not exist and that user base is not taking our products. They are coming back. We are seeing over the period of 4 months, people coming back with a fourth order, fifth order. And which is why we've activated stuff like subscribe and save and stuff, so that they are sort of bought into the whole thing. But moving them back to something. So 2 questions. One is, should we even bother about and bang our heads around, we need to put them back into our platform, because this is a user base which is already bought into and has their credit card details, everything fed into a very seamless system. So in the initial growth phase, acquire the customer from where they are shopping. That's one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it is you technically don't acquire the customer and the customer is Amazon's. So how do you sort of still acquire those customers, whether it's through paid loops, viral loops, or it's through paid loops using the acquired customers, because you technically with their customer experiences, paid ads, etc. So I just want to understand how should that shift be, because consciously the money to spend on budgets is limited, and Facebook we've seen is a lot of burn through, and here we see a direct ROI.
So you will always see higher CAC in Facebook, right? Because like I said, the customer is far further away from the purchase decision in Facebook versus they are on Google Shopping or Google Search or Amazon Shopping, right? So my answer to you is actually threefold, right? First is it's not a direct jump from Amazon to Facebook. There is an intermediate world out there of Google Shopping and Google Search, right? So I think you're probably missing on that, right? You will get lower CACs there, because again, the reason why you get lower CACs on Amazon is basically because the shopping intent is already there in the customer, correct? That will be true of search and shopping as well. So you will get lower CAC also. Not only will you get lower CAC, they will be your customers. So in the short term, you will solve for that problem statement, right? That's one. Two is that that generally, as a rule, dependence on some other platform is a problem, right? Generally, because you don't know how the rules of that platform will change tomorrow, right? I'll give an example. We were significantly dependent on SEO at 1mg. There was a Google algorithmic update that happened on the 1st of August of 2018, if I'm not wrong. And we had spent last 6 months doubling our traffic from 5 million to 10 million monthly. And in one day, it fell to 4 million in one day as a result of the algorithmic update, right? So it is very important. And I'm sure all of you have gone through this process with Facebook changing their, with Facebook's attribution issues as a result of iOS, right? So you've all gone through that in the last few months as well, in terms of, your ROI is fundamentally changing forever on Facebook due to that change, right? And that will keep happening. So like generally it is a good thing to keep diversifying your risk, or rather your dependence on one single platform. It is always a good idea to consistently investing, diversifying that, right? So you should consistently look to find other channels of acquisition, right? That's the second. Third is you should look to convert this Amazon customer also to yourself, right? And you should find ways of doing that, whether it is in terms of, for example, what you send with the product, right? Yours is a product that has a high degree of customers are engaged with this, right? Because they're really feeling there's a real motivation about doing better for the environment. They really feel good about buying your product. That's why they buy a product, right? They feel like that they're doing something for the environment. So if you want to give them material, they're going to read about it, for example. They're going to read it, for example, right? What are you doing with in terms of what you send with the product, right? That's in your control, right? You can send whatever you want, right? And then you can take them on WhatsApp, you can take them on your platform, you can take them wherever you want. So think about leveraging all of what you can, right? From that perspective, even though you may technically not own the customer at Amazon, right? The third is you can look to, so tactically speaking, you can also very tactically put money in acquiring Amazon customers at the time when you know they're going to buy. You said they have high predictability, right? So how much do you know about these Amazon customers? Like, what do you know about them? Do you get any customer information?
No, we don't, because most of our highest selling stuff, we put it in FBA. So only the stuff which we, the core stuff, the highest selling is all in FBA. So technically you don't get data.
And then you don't have anything. So then you might want to, then you'll have to rely on what you have, right? Otherwise, what you could have done is you could have retargeted them, right? You would have said that, okay, I have predictability Yes, Devesh, I will going to come to that. The Lexus subscription programs, and she's already spoken about how they've activated subscribe and save on Amazon. But my point is that once you've sold the first product to this customer, convert them to a subscription. That's an opportunity to convert them into a subscription right then when they receive the physical product. Right? Another interesting way of doing this is probably product innovation, right? When your bar gets over, can there be something at the end of it? Because that's the contextual time at which they want to order another bar, right? So can you put some kind of material in your bar, for example? And I'm just being very, I'm just trying to be creative at this
we've
point.
thought of story cards, like basically certain things that you can insert.
And so as the bar gets consumed and as layers of the bar get over, there is information that gets revealed, right? And imagine, let's say this bar is 5 days away from completion. Typically, you will have some, math on if the bar is this thick, kitna centimeter, etc. So then you can literally put something there that prompts the customer to buy on your platform, for example, right? So maybe you just need to be a little creative about it, right? And subscription programs, yes, definitely. Right? That's something all D2C brands are doing for exactly this reason that you're pointing out, right? That's essentially why everybody's investing in subscription programs. And for you, subscription programs will work, right? Because for not everybody, subscription programs can work. For you specifically, it might, because of the nature of the predictability of the category and the use case, given that these customers care so much about this value proposition.
You're right about the algorithm change. There was a issue in February where our product sort of, there was a issue. So we saw a huge spike on our own site because they couldn't find it there. So it works the other way as well. But then the dependency is...
No, but there's a big drop-off also.
Yeah.
There'll be a big drop-off. Some people will just go and buy whatever there.
Yeah. Understood. Thanks.
Okay, great. Last two questions. Aditya, quick, and then sign up. Yeah.
Hey, Akshay. Akshay, one of the things I wanted to learn from you is, so you spoke about the Dunzo case study, where obviously the frequency is like, if you compare it to our apparel case, where people would say come and buy in 3 to 4 months, the frequency is significantly lower. And two, a lot of us would only have a website and not an app. And hence the amount of data, etc., that also we can collect and analyze and sort of segment is not as much in comparison to an app. With these two kind of constraints, with a much more lower frequency use case with lesser data available, any thoughts on how the habit building can be built? Because if you have a high frequency use case with a lot of data coming in, you can sort of dig deeper into a lot of things and figure out with these two kind of constraints, anything that we can do differently to build that habit?
So my response would be actually counterintuitive, which would be like counter to what you said. Like if there's no habit, there's no habit. Don't try to build it, right? So habits are a function of existing behaviors, right? In our case, in Dunzo's case, it is a habit because people need groceries every day and week, right? So they're already doing it. They're doing it differently, right? In your case, people are not going to buy apparel every month, right? Unless and until, I don't know, there might be cohorts of people who do that, but like I buy once in 2 years, for example, right? And I know I'm not the customer. I know that that's not the average frequency of apparel buying in India. I'm sure that it'll be once in 3 months to 6 months, right? Given obviously a younger audience, etc. But it's very difficult to build a frequency where none exists. So I would rather think about it from the perspective of what is the category frequency, and then let's play around that frequency, right? That's one. Two is inherently, as a result of this particular inherent frequency of this category, your focus, your point of leverage will actually be the first conversion itself, right? That is where the magic will happen. The magic will happen from impression to first conversion, right? It will not happen after the first conversion, right? Given the nature of your category, given the nature of your gross margin dynamics, transaction value dynamics as well, right? And your TAM dynamics, right? You will have a fairly wide TAM. You'll have a 25 million plus TAM. Obviously, depending on the kind of apparel you sell, but let's assume 10 to 25 million to hoga, right? So given all of those dynamics, your point of leverage is between impressions, paid impression to transaction. right? First transaction, basically. Basically, every time a customer buys, they're a new transactor for him, almost, right? Unless and until you start seeing a retention curve, which is when then you will see, okay, that my payback, while my payback happens in this time, but my LTV is so high, right? Then if your LTV starts becoming really high, then that gives you competitive advantage in the performance marketing game. Why? Because you can outspend others. Simple, right? If you can spend, so currently, let's say assuming you said you spend 1,200, let's assume tomorrow your CAC increases to 2,000, but your LTV has gross margin LTV in the first year has gone to 5,000. Argument. Then you are like, yaar, agar push comes to shove, to मैं 5,000 भी CAC दे सकता हूँ. Push comes to shove, correct? Push comes to shove means what? You are winning in a zero-sum game, fundamentally, right? Because there are a limited number of customers. Those limited number of customers are limited number of impressions, right? So that's how zero-sum, that's how these games work out. So if you have LTV, that gives you basically leverage in terms of saying that I will outspend the competition. That's basically how it will work out.
Cool. Okay, great. Sainath, last question. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Sharad. Hi, Akshay. Super interesting session, and definitely I think I'll have to sit, if I can get a chance to sit with you, go down the math again. So we run a men's personal care brand, started out with the whole skincare domain, right? Going against the whole general norm of doing shaving and doing beard. And, we've been in the market for the past 16 months. And after the Facebook algorithm change happened, we've taken a big hit in terms of our conversions and ROAs on Facebook. And then since then, we had to make a lot of business decisions as to what we do. So we were kind of swimming between Amazon marketplaces and trying to still, move ahead with Facebook. And in November, we took a call to say, okay, let's stop Facebook because obviously of the limited budgets that we have and focus on marketplaces. Where, so our average price points are at 750. Our last CAC was about 930 before we stopped spending. Our average order value is about 1,000 and our COGS is 20%, right? And today we are sitting in that decision-making, understand that do we completely stop Facebook? Do we only focus on marketplaces? Like how do we really grow? We are launching new products. We have understood, new categories where customers will engage better and the repeatability increases. But nonetheless, we are at that zone as to understand what will be the right way forward.
Right. So what you at least got in a sense of is, how strong your payback is, right? So you said CAC was 700? Order value is 9. Sorry.
No, order value is 1,000. Yeah. And our CAC was 930 and order value is 1,000. And this is blended to us.
This is blended.
Yeah.
Okay. But even then, what that basically means is that it will take you more than one transaction to get payback, correct? Fundamentally.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So because your cost of goods is what you said, roughly 30%.
Yeah. 20%.
Right. 20%. Got it. So your basically CAC is $1,000. Your margin is $800. So you will need a second transaction to basically get. So you're in a similar ballpark range as the previous example that we were speaking about, right?
Yeah.
The apparel brand that we were speaking about. Right. So I think all of what we've spoken of until now applies to you as well, right? Fundamentally. What you need to be doing is, of course, figuring out how best you can optimize. You see, like I said, you're spending on marketplaces, your CAC will be most effective on marketplaces, right? Facebook will be lesser effective, no doubt about that. But you also have the opportunity to spend on search and shopping, which might be pretty effective because, like I said, the customer is close to the intent, close to the purchase decision over there, right? So one of the things that you want to do is potentially, try investing there, right? That's one. Two is you want to also now start thinking about what are the optimization techniques you're missing out on, right? And that really becomes a function of, do you have the right expertise to solve for that, right? Not just expertise, but mindset also, right? Do you have a performance marketer that is basically, or somebody responsible for performance marketing who is basically questioning all first principles of the platform that you're advertising on, right?
Okay.
Pretty much everything. You'll have to question everything, right? That's the only way of doing performance marketing, right? It's fundamentally an algorithm, right? At the end of the day.
True.
You have to, and there are X variables, you have to play with all those variables and then you have to optimize, right? It's an optimization game, right? At the end of the day. So are you optimizing correctly enough fundamentally? Are you doing enough of optimization, right? That's the second thing that you need to answer. The third thing that you need to answer is like, which is something that you're already focusing on, right? Saying that, okay, you've got this customer for this first transaction. What is the probability of coming back for that same product, for a different use case? And what can you do to improve all of that, right? Whether that's subscription programs, whether that is expansion of product lines, etc., right? All of those are potential answers over there, right?
Okay.
So I don't think I have anything different or unique to give you as an answer, except for all of the things that we've already discussed. And this is a very specific question.
Got it. No, I think it makes sense.
Okay, great. On that note, I just want to sort of share, to summarize 2-3 things. I mean, thank you, Akshay, for sort of doing this, taking out the time. I hope one of those key things we sort of, realize from the session is the importance of strategy, importance of sort of realizing, is paid ads right for us? How do we think of which type of loop is right for us? How do we sort of design that? I mean, I would also recommend everyone to sort of, go back and watch the recording because there's a lot of things where you sort of deeply question. I mean, and like I was discussing with Akshay, one of those natural things which flows out of it is because we always ask, right, which type of hire should we get? Can we get like a senior head of growth? Can we get like a senior marketer? But if you understood sort of what loops that really will drive your business to the core, then you understand the skill sets you need and the type of people that you can identify to sort of drive that. I also, on that note, want to sort of share, we'll go deeper into the other sessions, more deeply into each type, be it on Facebook, be it on scaling on, like think of SEO as a channel. So I feel today's session was sort of really valuable to sort of think through that from a strategy perspective. And on that note, Akshay, we have a way to say thank you to you. And we do that as we turn on the music in the background. So Jacqueline, can we have the music? And we put our hands together. So 2 things, everyone just turn on your videos. So Akshay knows all of us are here. I'm going to tell. Akshay, you can join us. We put our hands together in front. And we will count down between 3 to 1 and we end with Go Team. Okay? So, ready? 3, 2, 1. Go team. Go team. Thank you so much, Akshay.